Hi, I'm Keir Deneen, one of the producers of the Patient Empowerment Program podcast. As this series audience has grown tremendously over the past year, we decided to bring back one of our highest rated episodes and one of my favorites for everyone to hear. This aired back in October of 2022. It's called Coming Together for the Nano-rare Patient with John Maraganore. When Dr. Stan Crook ran Ionis and Dr. John Maraganore ran Alnylam, they were partners that turned into rivals, and not always friendly ones, as they dedicated a pursuit to an entirely new therapeutic space, RNA-targeted drug discovery and development. Since then, the two drug discovery titans have set aside their differences and come together for one reason: helping patients. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a conversation between two biotech industry leaders in this revived episode of the Patient Empowerment Program. Our podcast is proudly sponsored by Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. Since 2002, Alnylam has worked to pioneer RNAi therapeutics, an innovative new class of medicines that silence the genes that cause disease, and in doing so, help people live longer, healthier lives.
I'm Stan Crook. Welcome to the n-Lorem podcast series. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. John Maraganore as our guest. For most of our audience, John needs no introduction. John is one of the best known and most widely admired CEOs in the history of biotechnology. And though John and I were on occasion directly competitive, I count myself as one who admires John immensely. Until late last year, John was the founder and CEO of Alnylam. As CEO, he led the conversion of siRNAs from fascinating cell biology to a powerful platform for drug discovery. In addition to all the business successes he has made important contributions to the science. And he's also been very broadly involved in the senior leadership of our industry and served as a mentor to many. John grew up in Chicago and completed his undergraduate studies and PhD at the University of Chicago in 1986, and immediately entered the industry, first being a scientist at Genetics, and then moving on to Biogen, where once again he demonstrated his capabilities and advanced steadily, and then on to Millennium, and again, the same pattern that's typical of somebody who's so talented, and left Millennium as vice president of market and business development. And in 2002, he became the founding CEO of Alnylam, and the rest, as they say, is history. Today, John serves on a number of boards of directors, is involved in several investment funds, and continues to play an important role in the industry, and continues to serve as a mentor to many in the industry. John has been a colleague. He's also been a very tough competitor and a friend for a good many years. So it's a real pleasure to welcome John Maraganore today. John, it's good to see you.
It's great to see you, Stan, and thanks for all those kind words. You are an amazing colleague and friend, and also a fierce competitor.
Yeah. We'll try not to dwell on that too much here, John. Okay, but we'll
absolutely.
So, John, I know your biographical history well, but I realized as I was getting ready for this that I really don't know much about your background. I know your parents were Greek. What sort of family do you come from?
Well, my father was a physician and my mother was a nurse. She stopped, being a nurse when, we were born, so she can raise the kids. But they were immigrants that came to Chicago from Greece and brought us up in a typical, Greek American household. And we ate well, of course, and we were motivated by my father mostly, and my mother to keep trying harder and harder and working harder. But my father drove my passion for science and medicine, and my mother, I credit her with giving me the gift of optimism, which has been pretty helpful as a CEO for sure.
in biotechnology, when you're pioneering an entirely new technology, if you're not optimistic, you don't even try, right?
You got it. You got it. Very key.
Yeah. So I'm interested in when you realized that you were interested in not just basic research, but research applied to bringing therapeutics to patients.
Yeah. I mean, I always loved science, Stan. I was the typical nerd who had the chemistry set, the biology set, and did all that stuff. And it was my passion for sure. And when I went to the University of Chicago, I entered a research lab, in my sophomore year and started working on, after school hours and on the weekends, and basically doing basic research on structure function of proteins and enzymology. And I just loved it. I just enjoyed being in a laboratory and doing things. It always occurred to me when you were doing science that, you're doing something that nobody else in the world is really doing, and you're finding something out, in your work that could illuminate a whole, level of understanding scientifically. So I just enjoyed that completely. But in 1986, when I got my PhD, I went to the Upjohn company, and I went there because my thesis advisor was recruited to the Upjohn company to basically become one of their early scientists. And I did a postdoc at Upjohn, which really illuminated for me the power of the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industry working together, in a team-like manner to basically identify, potential therapies or cures. And it really became my calling at that point in time to stay in the industry and to be driven by what the industry can do.
It is an enormously complex and joyous experience that too few people get to experience, right?
You're right. Absolutely right.
So I know that you grew at both Biogen and Millennium, and they're two companies that, at least from the outside, seem very different to me. How would you describe your experience in those two places, and what were the big take-home things that put you ready for being so successful at Alnylam?
Yeah. Well, they were really two very, very different companies. Of course, Biogen's one of those early pioneers in the biotechnology industry, one of the admired, still independent, biotechs. And I went there in 1987, and went there as a scientist, bench scientist, and began doing some early work initially in the HIV field when HIV was just getting up and starting. I also discovered a drug at Biogen that ultimately made it to the market, by bivalirudin, which is an anticoagulant, direct thrombin inhibitor. And at Biogen, I really learned about drug discovery because I took this invention. I was the program leader. I led the multidisciplinary team all the way into phase 3 clinical development. And then in 1994, we decided to stop the development of that program when the phase 3 trial ended up with mixed results. And it was a very important learning experience for me. The drug ended up getting approved in the hands of another company. But for me to actually lead that program and do the drug development was really one of the funnest things I've ever done to this day. I then transitioned at Biogen into the business side and became the head of business development at Biogen for the last 3 years that I stayed at Biogen. And at Biogen, Stan, you may remember Jim Vincent. I really benefited from that person. May rest in peace. But Jim was a notorious leader in the industry because of his stubbornness and his thick-headedness. But he did teach me about the critical nature of just having a very high bar for everything you do. And the management skills I learned from Jim to this day, I think were really very helpful. But then I went to Millennium in 1997 and worked for a great visionary leader, Mark Levin, one of the biggest thinking leaders I've ever met and worked for. Very colorful individual, as you know. And Millennium was a company that was driven off of a big vision, a big idea. And I learned the benefits and the challenges of working in a company under that type of roof. But really was a fantastic experience. Of course, we were focused on the genome and solving the genome and helping make drugs out of genomic research.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating experience and very different from mine, of course. I suppose that you would probably agree that for the last 20 years, you've been a dream merchant, that what you did was conceive a dream and sell the potential of that dream, and then convert that to, the daylight, the reality of actually doing it. Talk to me a bit about how that felt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I made the decision in 2002 to leave Millennium to go start Alnylam as the founding CEO. And Stan, I at the time, I have to say I was very happy at Millennium. I would often get phone calls to go be a CEO, but I was really very happy at Millennium. I love working with Mark Levin. He was a tremendous leader and a friend. But I became convinced as the recruiters and people like Phil Sharp and other people were trying to persuade me to go to Alnylam. I became convinced that if we're able to understand how to make drugs out of these small interfering RNAs, that I could actually be involved in helping create a whole new class of medicines. And of course, at the same time, I was looking at the scientific progress that was being done at Ionis, and ultimately Alnylam stood on the shoulders of Ionis to be able to advance the medicines that we did. But there was a foundation there of reason to believe in developing very high impact medicines. And so I had to take the plunge. I remember I was just getting married the same year. I talked to my fiance. I said, look, I think this is going to be the right thing to do. Obviously, she was very happy with me doing the transition along with getting married the same very year. In fact, my offer letter for the job was sent to my honeymoon suite in Mauritius. And I was pleased to accept it. But I really believed that with Alnylam's technology and what the founders have put together, that we could really create a whole new drug class. And I really believe that joining the company at that time would be a remarkable endeavor, and it turned out to be the case.
And of course, you focused meaningfully on rare diseases. Your pipeline, of course, is much larger than just rare diseases. What drove you into the rare disease space, John?
Yeah, well, it's driven by the patient, Stan, first and foremost. I mean, the disease burden for people living with a rare disease is enormous. And at the same time, there's incredible genetic data that really shines a light on how science can solve the problem. And so when you have this situation, patient with a rare disease, combined with the genetic understanding of how you can treat it, and then you have a technology that can be applied to it, there's nothing else you can do than go down that path. It's a guiding light. It's a clear direction of travel that you really have to take on. And we're really proud. We brought 3 rare disease medicines to the market, and we have others in registration right now and in late stage development. But the impact that we've been able to have in some of these rare diseases is really, to me, one of the greatest thrills and joys of the Alnylam story, for sure.
Yeah, it is a powerful way to do work and to feel good about the work you do. And it's a little appreciated outside the industry. I'm sure you would agree.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
We hope you're enjoying the n-Lorem Patient Empowerment Program podcast. We at n-Lorem want to provide support to our podcast listeners the best way that we can. There's no better way for us to do that than to ask you directly. Do you have questions you want to ask Stan Crook? Stan will be taking questions directly from you and other podcast listeners and dedicating an entire episode towards answering your questions, AMA style. If you're a nano-rare disease patient, family member, friend, physician, rare disease advocate, or you just enjoy the podcast, we want to hear questions from you. Please don't be shy. All questions are important and may end up helping other listeners. So don't miss a great opportunity to get your questions answered by the Patient Empowerment Program host, CEO of n-Lorem, and the father of antisense technology himself, Dr. Stan Crook. To submit a question for the upcoming Q&A episode, email podcast@n-Lorem.org. That's podcast@n-Lorem.org with the subject line podcast question. If you wish to be identified, mention your name in the email. If not, we'll keep your submission anonymous. We can't wait to hear from you. Now back to the episode.
Well, I remember sitting in my office in Carlsbad, and you and Barry Green showing up looking for a license, as I recall. And at that time, there were a lot of other siRNA would-be companies, and we were entertaining proposals from all of them. And then I met you and Barry, and I said, I don't know whether siRNA is ever going to be a drug, but if it's going to be a drug, it will be with these guys. And so we ended up doing that license. And then from there, of course, we collaborated on a large number of things, including co-founding and co-funding Regulus, a microRNA company. So we had a long positive experience, even though we were seen in the rest of the world as direct competitors in terms of the technology space. But I do think that working together helped us both achieve the ends that we sought to do. Would you say that too?
Absolutely, Stan. I mean, the deal that we did back in 2004, and I'll never forget flying over to Carlsbad and visiting with you and Lynn and putting that arrangement together, was frankly one of the smartest things that we ever did at Alnylam, because it created, and I think also for Ionis, it created this, I like to call it, Pax Oligo, like the Pax Romana that had occurred, but this sense of peace between these two technology competitors, but frankly, two technology pioneers. And it also created this remarkable synergy between the companies that allowed us to do some really good science together. We had very frequent engagements with each other, as you know. We started a company together, as you mentioned. We also found ways in which we could avoid, competition with each other on specific programs, which was smart and a clever thing to do. But it really was an important arrangement for sure. For us to have tried to find a way around the remarkable, accomplishments that Ionis had done from an intellectual property standpoint would have cost us years and hundreds of millions of dollars to do it. So it made, from a business standpoint, it made a lot of sense. And then at the same time, I think Ionis had a partner in the RNAi space that they can count on and benefit from. I mean, Ionis benefited economically from our success as well, which is really terrific. So it was a good arrangement, and it was one that I'm really proud of at the end of the day.
As am I. And so we did all kinds of great stuff together. And then we had a couple of drugs that were directly competitive.
Drats.
And we discovered that we're both really competitive. Oh, surprise. And we had a falling out. And each of us has his own perspective about that. But we didn't talk to each other for a few years.
Right.
And as I thought about the patients that we're trying to serve at n-Lorem, I realized that I need all the help I could get. And you could be an incredibly helpful person for these patients. And it made no sense to hang on to whatever bitterness I felt. But I was very, very worried when I wrote that email to you asking you if you'd like to talk. And you were immediately gracious. So I know how it felt from my end. What about you?
I'll tell you, Stan, I never ever stopped admiring you, and you know that. And I also was watching the n-Lorem story from afar, from the East Coast, and really thought it was powerful. In the Talmud, there's a phrase: "Whoever saves a single life saves the whole world." And it's a phrase that really comes to mind when I think about what you did in this new effort with n-Lorem, because the power of treating just a single patient with the disease with a technology that can address it is just awe-inspiring. And so I was seeing all this, and I was excited about what you were doing. So when you reached out, I was so happy to respond and get back to you. And listen, when we had this competitive period of 2-3 years together, we ultimately got back together. To me, it reminded me of a big brother and a younger brother. They get into a fight, but they still come together at the end because they're family. And I really felt the same way as we've now been working together on n-Lorem.
Well, I think we did come together around a family, and the family is the Nano-rare patient. It's the people
exactly.
And in the end, it's vital to these patients that the two of us participate in this, because we're the people who created this opportunity. And so it was certainly, well, I'm embarrassed that I waited as long as I did. And you've been just extraordinarily helpful already. And so why don't we spend some time now talking about n-Lorem and the patients and the model that we're proceeding with, which is a nonprofit model, and how you see all that potentially unfolding.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think the starting with the power of the technology, the antisense technology, and maybe other technologies that come into it in the future, but being able to selectively design a medicine for a patient or a very small group of patients with a very discrete genetic defect is incredibly powerful. Being able to deliver that, achieve a desired therapeutic effect, do it safely, and then on top of it have the regulatory framework, the framework from the FDA that enables all that. That's not trivial. The FDA obviously had to think a lot about how does it enable the advancement of these type of medicines for patients. So one aspect of it to me is the technology, which is really impressive, and the regulatory framework for the technology. The other aspect of it is really, of course, the patient and the ability of giving hope to a patient with a nano-rare disease and a family that surrounds that patient as well. And then, frankly, the generations of other patients with nano-rare diseases who can see what we can do one patient at a time. It is a very powerful thing, and it really does go back to that Talmudic quotation that I gave a moment ago about how you can really save a world by virtue of saving just one life.
You bet. And for me, it's very much like returning to the practice of medicine, which I still miss, because it is that intimate experience of one patient, one family, one hope at a time. And of course, I'm looking forward to your involvement in getting you more involved with some of the patients and families and so on. And we've both been trailblazers. We've both taken an opportunity that was a blank piece of paper and wrote a textbook. And we both then took steps that meant we were always in uncharted territory. And the name that Jefferson gave to the Lewis and Clark expedition has always been something I admire a lot. And he called it the core of discovery. And I think of n-Lorem, Alnylam, and Ionis as cores of discovery focused on the inner landscape of health and disease and helping patients. And so it's a great tremendous value to these patients to be able to have you on the team and helping us do the things we need to do. And I firmly believe that the next technology that will be ready to take on this task and industrialize this task so that we have quality at every step and scale will be siRNAs. And so it also made sense from my point of view that we would bring the two people together who knew those technologies better than anyone else, so that when the technology makes one more step or two, then our patients could benefit from that. And obviously, even though you've retired from Alnylam, this collaboration extends to Alnylam now. And there is no better organization to discover an siRNA and develop it than Alnylam. And, I don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but it will happen. That's the next thing.
Yeah, it will happen. It will happen. And Stan, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of how you see it all coming together. And I also, to your point about being on the frontiers of discovery, doing it together with a colleague, a brother, an older brother, a younger brother, whatever the case might be, it is just that much more powerful at the end. And I think that we can bring ASO and siRNA technologies together, help this amazingly important cause, and help first and foremost these patients with these nano-rare diseases.
Well, I welcome you to all that. And I guess the final comment that I'll make and leave it open for you to sort of finish is, I believe we've made great progress at n-Lorem, but what we have left in front of us is an enormous task. And one of the biggest questions that we must answer, is a nonprofit model like we're developing sustainable?
Yeah.
And as you thought about n-Lorem, how did you think about solving that and proving indeed that it is sustainable, industrializable, and scalable?
Well, I think it is sustainable, Stan, and I think you're beginning to prove that it is. One of the ways that you create sustainability is by creating relationships with other companies, whether it's the Alnylams of the world, but also the clinical trial networks of the world and other stakeholders in the system. Then work with patient groups that obviously have a vested interest in advancing medicines for nano-rare diseases. So these are all the different communities that together we can create. And then with the generosity of philanthropy and others that can contribute, we can do this in a nonprofit manner and ultimately deliver cures for patients that otherwise have no hope.
They really have no hope. They are hopeless. And you're right. Hope is a powerful thing to lose and an important thing to recover, not just for the patient, but for the family. So
that's absolutely right.
It's been a great pleasure chatting with you. And I want to end then giving you the floor. Anything that you would like to say to the community that's interested in what we're doing, the nano-rare patients?
Yeah, well, I would just say this. I hope that people take a look at what's already been done with n-Lorem, but then also think about the power of n-Lorem going forward. I have no doubt that as people get to understand the stories of patients that have been impacted already by n-Lorem, and then the framework that's been put together to help patients going forward, they will truly understand the impact and potential power of this approach. And so I really encourage everybody out there to take a really close look. This is a remarkable effort here to help a patient community in a high impact way. That is what we are all about as a biotechnology industry. That's what we're all about as scientists and physicians. And it's something which, of course, Stan, you have done a brilliant job in leading thus far. And I'm happy to be on the boat with you this time and look forward to many years of working together.
I do too. And I think it is showing the true heart of our industry. And I know we share that passion, that heartfelt passion to see people who are suffering be better.
Yeah, agreed.
Thanks so much, John, for joining us. And it's been a great privilege to know you all these years and to get to know you a little better in this conversation as well.
Terrific. Great, Stan. Thank you so much.
Our podcast is proudly sponsored by Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. Since 2002, Alnylam has worked to pioneer RNAi therapeutics, an innovative new class of medicines that silence the genes that cause disease, and in doing so, help people live longer, healthier lives.
n-Lorem is a nonprofit committed to discovering and providing personalized experimental treatments for free, for life, to patients with genetic diseases that affect 1 to 30 patients worldwide, referred to by n-Lorem as Nano-rare. Many of these patients progress and die without ever achieving a diagnosis. This is where n-Lorem comes in. They do the impossible by providing hope, and for those that they can help, free lifetime treatment. For more information about n-Lorem or today's episode, visit n-Lorem.org. Any questions can be sent into podcast@n-Lorem.org. Search n-Lorem on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook to connect with us. This video is hosted by Dr. Stan Crook and produced with the help of the following professionals. Thank you for watching.